Um, so last week was physics, and I apologize. There's a whole chunk that I didn't include. You obviously didn't miss it, but I did. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and so this is chemistry, but I'm going to go back to the physics stuff because that's important that I do that. Well, every year I say something about this. What do you have to do to get a Nobel Prize? Well, pretty simple. Be born in the US or Europe. At least that's the way it's looked. Move to the US or second best Europe. This is an odd one. Don't hail from a low to lower middle income country. That's an interesting one. Now we're talking about the science prizes now. Be male, although that's clearly changing, thank goodness. This is a very interesting one, but it's restarted because, you know, there's a laying on of hands that goes on in science, and I was certainly aware of it in my career, that the person who taught me was taught by somebody else, and you go back. And now, of course, fields are getting crowded, there are a lot more people involved, but there clearly was a period in the 20th century, and before that, where pretty small groups, and people knew one another, and they visited with one another, and never more so than in physics. And you'll see that in a photograph of the group together in a second. And as you might expect, if you kind of live in the right place, you tend to get into the right places, and there's a certain relationships that you can count on that can kind of get you into this university or that university, and so your path is easier. And you, in turn, if you become a senior person, you can smooth the path for the people coming behind you. And so you see this extraordinary thing where John Strutt, who won a Nobel in 1907, or something I don't even remember, but anyway, who has, you can trace, well, the Nobel group did, to 228 academic descendants, meaning people not related in family, but related, it had some connection with one another. And I don't think that's surprising at all. This will come, this is a larger theme that I've had, and that is that people do their most cognitively creative work in their third and fourth decades, and maybe even earlier. And so I take note of when did they get the prize, when did they actually do the work, and then realizing that the foundation for doing the work probably took a decade or more before that. So, and that gets into the whole business of aging, and what's happening to the brain, when is it most fit, and we have it on play, don't we, with what's happened in the US Senate, and less extent the House, and the very presidency of the United States, where there are age-related changes. Interesting enough, here's a father and son here. Lawrence, he's son at 25 and father who was 54. I wonder, well, I don't know. I mean, with a tight-knit family like that, father, son, who did what? So on we go. Well, I mentioned last week that, you know, physics is really, it's a standalone because of this division of theoretical physicists and experimental physicists. And I mention this because on the theoretical side, I've kind of, in red there, I've kind of put this representative, the kind of key players in what really produced the revolution, the quantum revolution in that first 30 years in physics. And in overlapping in the same period, experimental physicists, obviously there's Curie, Marie Curie, and her husband. She won 2 Nobel Prizes. And you know the story about the second, right? Okay, well, the story about the second was that she lost her husband. He was killed in I think it was a horse or carriage accident. And several years went by, and she developed a relationship with a married man, and it was a good these days. So what? But then in French society, well, she was awarded, or they were about to award her. She found out that she was #1 for the Nobel Prize that year, this time in chemistry. And then she also found out that she, there was a lobbying group, don't give it to her because of this going on. Well, she didn't take that lightly. And she got a hold of the head of the nominating committee, and she said, look, I did the work. The rest of the stuff, there are stories about me. That's no relevance at all. They backed down, and she got the second Nobel Prize. And so she should have. But it adds a little extra to the story, doesn't it? Well, there's the group. I mean, they held these annual meetings, Solvay conference. Look at them. I mean, there's Max Planck, Einstein here. I'll walk around here because, this group got along well. They knew each other well, and except Heisenberg and Schrödinger. And they are the key players in quantum theory in the mid 1926. Both published very different ways of solving the mystery of how the quantum universe actually worked. His was intuitive and easy to understand. His was buried in matrix math that no one understood how to do, but the result was the same. But the two squabbled. But there were very few, I mean, did they agree as a group on things a lot? No. Did they get along with one another? Yes. And that's a lesson. So socially and personally, they often got along. And certainly, there's Niels Bohr, there's the other protagonists I'll mention today. There they are. Long debate about the reality of quantum mechanics, and best of friends to the end. And in fact, one of my favorite Nobel Prizes concerns that. I'm going to say something about it today. Well, you already know this after last week, so I'm not going to say anything more because you've seen the photograph. But this is, as I mentioned last week, the 100th anniversary of that miracle year in 1925, 26, Schrödinger and Heisenberg and Bohr to a lesser extent, when they finally solved how, at least the mathematics of how the quantum universe worked, even though they arrived at it from very different directions and with very different math. And but look at it now. This is a survey. What does quantum mechanics say about reality? First major survey of physicists. This is this year. Looking back, are all these disputes about what's real gone? Absolutely not. Probably around half of them still think, yes, the math works, we get the right answers and that kind of thing. Can we explain it? And is it, as Einstein asked, is it real? Still a legitimate question. Most of them, 99% of them plus, are quite content to use the math because it works and works extremely well. But understanding what it means is a whole other matter. and quantum mechanics has always been missing gravity here. That's the missing link between that and general relativity, Einstein's masterpiece. So I thought it was quite interesting that the journal Nature had a big section, or at least was writing it over separate different issues. Well, where are we now, 100 years later? Well, apparently not very far, at least on the basics. So, now this is my favorite Nobel Prize. I absolutely love this because Einstein was all too human. He's brilliant, stubborn, and he'd make mistakes, but apologetic when his errors were pointed out to him, and when he understood what those errors were. And but this was a year, 2022, when the award was given for did entanglement, meaning if you have two particles and they're entangled, that is behaving exactly the same, doing this. If they're entangled and they're doing that in sync all the time, they are entangled. And Einstein said, oh, well, okay, if that's a prediction of quantum mechanics, well, let's move them further apart. Let's move them light years apart. Are they still entangled? That's nonsense. That makes no sense at all to Einstein. And so it sat for 30 years before John Bell, a Scottish physicist who was actually very sympathetic to Einstein's position, and he proposed an experiment that might resolve this. And the laureates of that year did those experiments. And guess what? Well, entanglement was real.
But tell me,
No, okay, but only at the short distances of the lab, I mean, not those extraordinary differences. So it wasn't really in conflict with the speed of light. Yeah. And, but even so, what do I know about physics? But what I do, I think at the deepest level, Einstein was right, still is right. And that's reflected in the survey this year, going back. So here are the fellows, John Clauser, who did the critical experiments here. I like this one because, you know, Einstein was a man out. He was a Jew. He was very familiar with his faith, Judaism, and all the characters in it. And here is his response, that the true Jacob, I mean, Jacob is the one who stole the inheritance or the blessing from his father Abraham, and then he gets into this fight or struggle with an angel or God, whatever, and he frequently makes references to this stuff. They're almost throwaway comments. He's very, very familiar with that, and he had a sense of humor about it too. But anyway, but you see, as a scientist, he says quantum. We'll go back to go. Quantum mechanics is. He acknowledged that it worked. He understood that, but he goes deeper. And he says, but an inner voice tells me that this is not the true Jacob, meaning the one that should have been blessed. The theory yields much, but it hardly brings us close to the secrets of the ancient one, God. And he was forever talking about God, more than any other physicist I know about. He got all kinds of letters from children and adults and that kind of thing, and he responded to them, interestingly enough. So anyway, that's, now on to chemistry. I definitely have my favorites in the 9 years, so I'll just say a few things about them. Frances Arnold, I would put her at the top. You'll see why in just a second. Jennifer Duda and Manuel Carpentier for their work on gene editing, magnificent stuff. Anyway, so let's just revisit some of this stuff. Well, there's Frances. Did the work in her 30s, 62 at the time of the Nobel Prize. A very interesting personal life. 2 husbands, one a real ditz, and the other one I'm not sure much more. 3 children, one died. She had lots of personal struggles in her life, but she was very disciplined and just an interesting person. Well, what made her so interesting? Because designing proteins is extraordinarily difficult, and several Nobel Prizes have been given for this. And why is it difficult? Because natural proteins often consist of hundreds, well, think about the COVID virus, of kind of hundreds, even thousands of amino acids in some order of 20 amino acids. You do the math. It's almost impossible, rationally, to design proteins that way. And she said, well, let's let evolution do it. So she had an enzyme. Enzymes are proteins. She had an enzyme which didn't work all that well. And she said, well, gee, I can't figure this out. So why not, let's put evolution to work. And what she did is she created random mutations in the genetic code for the thing, and then inoculated those mutated genes into bacteria. And so they created mutated forms, various forms of that enzyme. And then she had an open competition of them. She gave them a job to do, and the top ones, the top performers, she kept and threw out the others. Then she cycled it again and again and again. This is like AI. This is the iterative process of AI. You run the data through the program again and again and again, and then the picture gets sharper and sharper and sharper and sharper. It's a very iterative process, and she was applying this using evolution. It worked. It was brilliant, and no one else thought of it. There was no competition because no one else thought about it, and people have continued to use this as a way of refining or developing, evolving proteins. And of course, this kind of thing happens in nature because random mutations come up. Some proteins are a little bit better. They kind of work better, or maybe not as well, as we'll talk about in just a second. Well, then we come to Emmanuel and Jennifer here. 51, they certainly don't look their ages, they're 51 and 56 at the time of the Nobel. Now, this was no 20 or 30 years before. The whole business of gene editing was a buzz in the science world for at least a decade, but no longer than that. And the Nobel Committee, and there was also a brutal competition with Harvard and the Broad Institute. And it got nasty with suits in Europe and in the United States. And I thought it was very interesting, the Nobel Committee, they could easily have added somebody, bumped one of these two, and added 2 from the Broad group. They made a decision, no, this belongs to these 2. No mention of them. Good decision. We can talk about that later, but it just shows you that the committees sometimes face pretty hot issues. This had gone to the court in I don't know what the general court is in Europe that settles these things, but anyway, it went to it, and they won, and they lost in the U.S. court. and it also helped. Jennifer Newton is a shrewd person. This book came out a year before the Nobel, so before the nominating process. And it's a very good book. It's one of my best in my library. And you can see the little business. These letters stand for different bases: adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine in the DNA. Clever. But the book is cleverly written, and lots of almost hand-drawn illustrations that are very clear. And so it's well done. How does it work? Well, I'm not going to go through all of this, but it was really all about, if you want to fix a gene, well, let's say there's work to be done in my home at 180 Gage Street, right? So it has an address. There's an address on DNA, there's an address on the streets here. Then if there's work to be done at that address, then I want something that tells me, GPS or whatever, when I've arrived at that destination, okay? And that's the CRISPR part of it, right? That's a small molecule of maybe 10, 20, 30 bases in a row that constitute the equivalent of my 180 Gage Street, all right? So it knows where to go, but it also has an attached enzyme that when it gets there, it cuts out the faulty gene, and it has a little add-on, it can insert the corrected version. And that works. And I must say there's going to be another Nobel Prize soon for that, because sickle cell anemia and thalassemia are very devastating blood diseases in the world, if only because there are millions of people with them. And both have been gene edited, and it works. So that's what's going to happen there. And Huntington's disease, I wrote a little article about this, but I used to see this more when I was a resident and as a young staff person. But sometimes the genetic abnormality is simply not so much that there's an abnormal kind of little segment of sequence of bases in the DNA, but that's a prolonged one. It's like somebody stepping on one key of the piano and keeping their finger on it, so you always just get the same note. No. So it creates nonsense, enough nonsense in the DNA string that information can be translated into a useful protein or messenger RNA. So that's the way it was, and the way it is. And this is hot off the press, a form of gene therapy here. But they've gone further than that. Okay, why edit the DNA? Why not edit the next one along the row? I mean, it goes right from, if you want to make a protein, you need a gene in the DNA. Then then it creates a messenger RNA to carry that genetic information into the cytoplasm, where it's then translated into the protein. So you have three places where you can actually edit. In this case, not the DNA, not at the end stage, but the messenger RNA. If you turn off the messenger RNA, there's no protein made, no abnormal mutant protein made. So that's the fix. And it's carried into the body by a safe, usually safe virus. The problem with this is, with this solution, it's not a solution forever. And if you had to give another shot, this patient or the patient might well have already an immune response to that virus. So you can't safely deliver it with that virus, with that same vehicle. So we're going to talk about that kind of stuff next week, because next week is my favorite of the three classes, when we talk about the immune system. So on we go. Oh, here's an interesting thing. In a world where I'm surrounded by nature, I looked out the door the other day, 5 deer on my back, and when I was out on my bike maybe a week or so ago, on the same kind of trail that number 1 creek, when it gets out into the country, I counted over 40 deer in one field. A lot of them. So why am I telling you that? For no good reason.
Interesting.
Interesting, yeah, it's maybe more interesting than the other stuff. But you can see if you create a tool, people will use it. And so now people are editing dogs, their pets. Or they're creating the exact versions of their pet. And where does this stop? If you think this is okay for your beloved dog, why wouldn't you think it's okay to enhance human cognitive characteristics or behavioral characteristics or physical characteristics? Why wouldn't you think about that? I mean, that's what they're doing with these dogs. It makes them run, or these horses, they run faster, right? And we already, to some extent, do some inbreeding in humans, and we've been doing it for thousands of years for certain characteristics, right? In choosing mates with compatible cognitive and behavioral characteristics, but also physical characteristics. So we've been doing it, just not with the aid of CRISPR. This chemistry prize was also a favorite of mine. Barry Sharpless, by the way, on the right, this is his second Nobel Prize. He's a very solid person. If you want somebody to lead up a lab that will help you out and direct you along the way and take his time with you, he's one. The other one is this Carolyn Bertozzi. She's a marvel. She's very well liked and just as important, well respected by people who work with her or that she collaborates with. And the BBC had a year ago a roundtable discussion of that year's Nobel Prize winners, and filled out with a few others. She was the adult at the table. She was very good. Very impressive person, but her science, and what they did was click chemistry. Well, what's the basis of this? It's really hard to develop these long proteins, so why not build them up from smaller proteins and then kind of click them, literally click molecules together and to make longer proteins. Well, it works, and that's why the Nobel Prize, it was given for click chemistry. And I'm not going to go into all of this, but she used this, for example, to, if you want to see, in this case, a natural sugar, particular sugar molecule in a cell, how are you going to see it? Well, attach a fluorescent dye to it. How are you going to get the fluorescent dye attached to the sugar? By click chemistry. By clicking a fluorescent molecule together with another half, this azide here, attached to another small sugar. They kind of click together like my belt or whatever it is. And so it's a brilliant idea. It works. And there's the result on the right. I can't show you because this thing doesn't project. Isn't that interesting? Projects here. Oh, what happened? That was interesting. Ah, good. Better not do that again, or I'll be done. And this last year was interesting because this was that there were 2 Nobel Prizes given for AI, undeclared Nobel Prizes to AI last year in physics and chemistry. They didn't name Google as a winner, but Google was behind them. And certainly this was true with Denise Hesebus and John Jumper in London, England, both working employees for Google. They had all the resources of Google, the computer resources and that kind of thing. I will say one thing for these three men. David Baker was working independently and developed a similarly powerful program. And both of them gave the software away. No cost. Anyone who wanted it. And when they opened it up, they had almost 1 million requests within hours for the software. Very powerful stuff. And and why did these two get what their Nobel Prize was? Because getting back to proteins, trying to figure out the three-dimensional shape and therefore the function of a protein is extraordinarily costly and difficult and expensive, unless you do it with AI. In which case it can do it in minutes and be as precise as crystallography. So that's why it was awarded a prize. But it also, there are certain dividends. One of them is, I learned more than I need to know about venomous snakes for this one, but among the worst are these three-finger snakes that have three kind of toxins. One, the blood doesn't coagulate, so people hemorrhage. Now the other one, the tissues just fall apart, lysis. And the other one is it blocks nerve muscle transmission, so people become paralyzed. So you pick your choice, it will be all three, and furthermore, you won't have time to get to anyone in time. And so a nasty bunch of snakes, and so the idea, and the problem is that yes, antivenom exists. It's not terribly helpful in this instance, but you have to have it close to where the person who's bitten is. And most snake antivenoms have to be kept cold. Well, that's not going to happen in a village, is it? 100 miles away. So they really, what they did here is they actually did use crystallography to figure out the precise shape of this three-fingered protein that's responsible for all three toxic effects here. And then they did a kind of a magical thing. They said, okay, we need a lot of this. We know what the target is. What we need is a lot of that stuff, that kind of protein, to create the antivenom. Well, how are we going to do that? They created the DNA to do it. And so bacteria created this three-finger protein precisely. And so now the cost of making the antivenom plummeted, and theoretically should be a lot more available. Now this is this year, so I don't know what the full fallout will be, but I'm sure if I lived in Australia or large parts of Africa, or South Asia, I would be very interested in this. Here's another thing. If you're a scholar and trying to put together old documents, the same kind of iterative programs that were used to solve proteins and snake venom kind of stuff can be applied to figuring out, well, if you've got a tablet and half of it's broken off or 2/3 of it, how do you figure out what the missing text is? AI. And it does a pretty good job. And you say, well, how do I know? I mean, we don't have a sample of the complete one here, so we don't know. But if you see it enough times, 100 times or more, in other documents, not the same documents, but others, then it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. You can figure it out. And AI, the point is, AI does it a lot more quickly. And you know about that business about scrolls, rolled up scrolls, and sometimes they were burned or almost to the charcoal stage, but certainly cooked. And you can't open them up because they just shatter. So how do you decode that? With two things. A CT scan that scans a scroll through in very thin slices, which a computer, AI, can then figure out, put the slices together, so you can actually get a legible, readable text. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah, so old texts have kind of taken on new life, courtesy of AI. And now David Baker, he's the other one. Well, I'm not going to get into this, but he's in many ways the most creative, because he didn't have Google behind him. He was Google and many other things in his lab, and he wasn't interested in creating kind of, or at least figuring out proteins that we already know about. He was interested in creating innovative proteins, ones that don't exist in nature, or something like it where it would be very useful. This is an obvious one right here. He's taken a nanopart, these are nanoparticles in here, and then he's created proteins, de novo, that are like a close match to a virus that you're trying to vaccinate against, and then attaching them to, so there's no natural virus here. You can't get this viral disease. There's no way you can get it. But you can certainly get an immune response to it, a very effective one. And but in the current tea world south of the border, I'm not sure that will go anywhere, at least for several years. Well, here we are to the group today. This is, was this the most interesting Nobel I've ever reviewed? No. Are the characters here interesting? They are. So particularly this Richard Robson. Now look at the ages. There's 14 years between the three generations here. And so let's just, well, sorry, there are two slides shouldn't be in here. So they were awarded this prize for the development of what's called metal organic frameworks. I'd never heard of them before until I looked at this stuff back in early October. So it was all brand new to me. But they turned out to be a very interesting kind of molecular construct. They can harvest water from desert air, extract pollutants from water, capture carbon dioxide. They can do all this kind of stuff magically, and a lot. Great volumes of the stuff, storing hydrogen safely. That's a big plus. Now, Richard Robson. I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to. Sorry, go back. I'm going to go one ahead. I love this picture. You know why I love it? Guy's 88. He's teaching. He's 2 years older than I am. And he's actively teaching. And look at the face. He's paying attention to the student. And he's watching her. She's the one writing on the whiteboard. And you might guess, looking at her, I don't know. Number one, it is a her. It wouldn't have been a her 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. But is she an Aboriginal person, or is she Chinese, or South Asian? She doesn't look like us. And I say it's a kind of a picture for the modern world, really, because here's an 88-year-old teaching with great interest, a student. I have no idea what her level of it was, but and you know, he comes across. I mean, he's still very active, and he's from the UK, then moved to Australia. He likes to doodle with assembling atoms and creating novel molecules. And he started out with students, undergraduate students, you know, with maybe you were exposed to this. You know, you have a ball and you have little sticks, and you have to drill the holes in the ball in just the right place, because when you look at a molecule, the bonds are in very particular places, right? And so, but teaching them how molecules might be created, beginning with the basics like water, and the other thing written all over his face, he's patient. This is the guy who really likes doing what he's doing right there, and he's in no rush to go anywhere else. So good for her. And anything I've read about him since, that's a good read. So where are we here? Well, the simplest one is a diamond, and diamond's made of carbon, and each carbon atom likes to kind of hook up with 4 other carbon atoms. That determines the structure of the of a diamond, repeated many, many, many times, right? To get a diamond. Well, he thought, I mean, this is a playful guy. He's not trying to make money. He's not even interested in writing papers much. He's just trying to see what he can do to assemble more and more complex molecules. So here's an example of a molecule that went nowhere as far as the economic effects went. But what he did is he substituted copper ions for carbon here. And then I don't know where he got this from, but there's another complex molecule here, but attached to a nitrile group that will actually hook up with copper. And what's he get? He gets this very complex, almost beautiful molecule here, but the big thing is it has cavities, open cavities in it. And what's ticking away in the next 2 decades with the other laureates? If I can create a very complex molecule, could I store stuff there safely? That's what's going on with the next 2 people. So let's see. Kitagawa from Japan, he kind of took it to the next level. And I'm not going to read all of the stuff, but what he did, he was kind of the middle person in all of this. He didn't create anything commercially worthwhile, but at least he, it was obvious that if you followed his train of thought in the development of these metal organic frameworks, you could create these complex molecules that would be useful. So he's the middleman in all of this. And then we go, and then also created kind of flexible molecules that, you know, if you took out, they look like little tennis balls in there, but anyway, but these are stable, rugged molecules. very dependent on the strength of their bonds. And very resistant to corrosion, that kind of thing, again, because of which metals are involved. So now here's the guy who really took this to Main Street. Because he looked at this stuff and he said, wow, this is marvelous. What this needs is industrialization. We need to make this a very rational process and develop a market for them. And that's exactly what he did. And there he is, 60 now. So his goal was to create this rational method, or at least a rational method for designing these complex molecular programs. And he also got into very good journals. There's Science and Nature within a year or two. So he clearly had a profile here. People would pay attention to that. And I'm not going to go into those, but you can see, you can even, with minor tweaks to it, these molecular constructs can get larger and larger and more useful. Now here, it's maybe hard to read for, but this is the molecular shape that traps water at night. So in the desert, just leave the thing out, and in the morning, literally pour the water out from air that is very arid. And here's another model. It looks like nonsense, but for holding carbon dioxide and hydrogen, or removing pollutants here. So all of these things look kind of complex, and they are, but they're also very useful. And if you doubt that, here's the papers on metal organic frameworks. Look at the number of papers. These are, thousands and thousands over here. Look at it, and I actually looked at the market for these things. This is good. There's big money in this stuff. And so Robson in Australia, who just enjoyed playing with the stuff, and then the middleman, well, at least a path for Robson, and or at least the last fellow. So it worked. Now, going back before we close out here, one source that I found, maybe some of you know about this. I discovered it, but the Royal Institution in Cambridge, UK, has courses in the sciences. And I discovered, wow, my eyes popped. There's all kinds of junk on YouTube. Some of it's good. Most of it is so-so. This is high quality stuff. This is their best profs talking about, for me, the first talk, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and doing it very well. So it's a really good source, and in this game, the game I'm in right now, sources is what it's all about. And if you're going to make sense of it and kind of understand it. How are we on time? Okay, this is something, these are from the New York Times, right? We were watching a scientific superpower destroy itself, referring to what's happening to higher education in the US, and defunding places and arbitrary behavior, and but the numbers bear it out. Here are the rising stars in institutions, and look at where in the top 10, now we're talking about science and engineering here. China has, in the top 10, 6. They weren't even on the sheet 10 years ago. And there's the US 2. And combining Europe and the UK, by the way, those numbers are ranked number. So Europe, third spot, fourth spot, US second spot, and eighth spot. So there's Harvard coming in at number 2. MIT did not do well, which is where my grandson is thinking about going. And well, I'm not going to read all of this stuff because it's repetitive, but clearly the trajectory is there. And I must say, in all fairness to the present occupant of the White House, this trend was developing before Trump. This is a trend that's been developing, say, for at least 10, 15 years, something like that. And it's, you know, there's one, I'm not gonna go through all of it. This is the poster boy for what one of the problems is. One is the US and Canada and UK and Europe have profited for decades from immigrants who come into the country, work like the devil, in good institutions, want to stay in the US, want to stay in Europe or whatever it is because of the lifestyle or the freedom, that kind of thing. They're very committed to the countries, and their legacy is very important. It sure isn't, I mean, we in Canada could not do this alone, and certainly the US can't either. And so I mentioned this thing, because here's this fellow born in China. This could be a profile multiplied hundreds of times over. So he comes, born in China in 1922, left for the US. He got a Nobel Prize, a very good one, and interesting that what they say about him, some of the best people, I mean, Paul Dirac is a really sharp guy. Went on to say that Yang's sense of mathematical beauty well, is quite extraordinary. And math, remember I mentioned in the physics prize, beauty is important to physicists in mathematics. It really is. He returned to China in early 2000. He married his second wife, 28. He was 82. Not bad. I'm jealous. But so there he is, and there he is with probably the most famous American physicist, Feynman, in a joint lecture. So I just finished on this because I think it's really important. And then I read stuff, for example, I'm aware of this because, as I say, I have a grandson now currently applying for engineering in the US and Canada. And so I'm very attuned to what's going on. The number of applicants from out of the country in the US has dropped like a stone. Where does MIT think it's going to go without, I mean, yes, they're kind of a local crowd, but that's not enough. And it's not enough in Canada either. So, I mean, a lot of U of T's success, and it's undoubted, has come from immigrants moving, settling in Toronto, and making their way. So if we don't support stuff like that, high quality stuff like that, our future's in jeopardy, I think. So I just wanted to add that. I said something about it last week, and it's in I mean, I've been following this China stuff for about 10 years now, and boy, what a story. And on my side, you know, my brother-in-law who's living out in Vancouver now. Well, he married my sister, but his family history is interesting because he came from a Greek family. He kind of looks like Prince Philip, very handsome looking guy. Anyway, they settled in Moscow. The Russian Revolution came along, and they got out and settled in Shanghai, and settled in and developed a winery. And despite the Japanese occupation, which far and away the worst, and the nationalists who were a lot better, and Mao's group were probably the best of the lot. And it's an immigrant story that's repeated again and again and again and again, isn't it? Because what the family did is Dina's older brother was sent to Canada to get an education, went to McGill, got an engineering degree. He establishes a presence in Canada. His younger brother comes out to go the same route into engineering, and then they bring out the kind of the parents and the sister and the rest of them. They kind of settle. That kind of story could be multiplied millions of times over, I think, in the 20th century, with all the dislocation from proxy wars and major wars and that kind of stuff. Those are ordinary, almost ordinary stories, if only because of the number. But a lot of them were very willing to work hard, and they contributed things. So locking the doors against, I see them locking the doors against your future. So on that, I'm going to finish. So next week, we'll move on to the immune system. I think it's almost as complex, maybe more than the nervous system. I had colleagues in rheumatology or anything to do with treating autoimmune diseases, and every time the slide presentation would come up, the slide would go up, and I couldn't figure out what cell was doing up. I mean, there were a whole parade of these characters with different letters on them, and that kind of thing made absolutely no sense to me. I kind of say, well, okay, if it works for you. And by the way, is the patient better? And but this time around, I couldn't dodge it too far. And the Nobel organization actually did a good job this time around in explaining the stuff, or at least providing me with enough leads that I could figure out what was going on. And so it's really all about, there's a central part of the immune system and a peripheral one. We're talking about the peripheral one next week. So that's what's on board. It's well worth hearing. And then we move on to the interesting stuff like economics and the Peace Prize and the biggest one, the Literature Prize.
Would you take a quick question before you finish?
Sure.
You mentioned molecules being used for storage.
Yes.
And you said, oh, you put it in the desert and the next morning you've got water.
Yeah.
But I don't understand what you put in the desert. Is it
the molecule itself.
That's what I don't understand.
These molecules were chosen and deliberately designed to have large interior spaces.
That I understand.
Okay. And then the very polarity that some of these molecules have attracts stuff like water.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're remarkably stable, but also almost inert. I mean, it's amazing the differences in molecules that you would think would be quite toxic, that you can pour into these things, apparently without any effect on the molecular framework.
But you say things, and I don't know, are the molecules being stored in a large container, are they, to collect the water? How does it work?
Oh, in the case of the molecular framework,
Right.
the bag, if you like.
Okay, the bag, okay.
The bag kind of sits inside of another bag,
Okay,
yeah.
so it's being contained
Yeah,
somehow?
yeah, it is.
Okay,
But I'll tell you, it's amazing, what was one of the analogies, that if you took the surface area of your thumb, that might, and take that as the size of one of these molecular structures,
okay.
it can contain all, let's say, CO2 or gas that might be contained in a space as large as a football field.
Oh, good grief. Okay. that-
So it's really very extraordinary. I mean, that's why they're so attractive. How do they and you can imagine this would be most true of gases.
Hmm.
Yeah, because liquids really don't change volume,
Yeah.
and, yeah,
So, sorry to hold you up.
yeah, no, that's fine.
Now, they're using that
I was
for
trying to escape.
storing hydrogen for, like, if you want to have a hydrogen-powered car?
Yes, that's one of the
No.
objectives.
What's it look like? Like, is it a solid block, or what's it look like physically?
Yeah.
It looks like, it looks very flimsy. It looks like it couldn't hold anything.
Is it solid, or is it?
Well, it is solid. I mean, the molecular structure is certainly solid. But it's very much, remember, in the design of these are very strong bonds, very hard to break the bonds.
Yeah.
So these are molecular structures that are very difficult to break, nor do they interact much, if at all, with many toxins and chemicals that we use, and gases. That's why they're so, that's why the market's kind of going crazy here, because one of the things would be, well, we've heard what, the last 15 years, 20 years, why not hydrogen as a fuel for airplanes, for cars, that kind of thing? Zero pollution.
But they couldn't
But
store
how do you store it?
Yeah, they couldn't store it.
Yeah, how do you store it in a stable way? Well, this offers a possibility, it's not there yet. It offers a possibility if it's scaled properly.
They made containers for hydrogen, but they had to be so strong,
Yeah,
take an atomic bomb to blow them up.
well, we won't try that. Is that called the H-bomb?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed your lecture last week, but I heard a theoretical physics expert speak some time ago, and his conclusion was, I think, that there's nothing more to be discovered in theoretical physics. That is, all universal constants have been now worked out. All the forces have been worked out. And so either there was one left for him to do, or there was nothing more to be discovered in theoretical physics. That's, we knew enough about theoretical physics to explain everything. It's just that we didn't know how to put it together to explain things. But you're still looking at me quizzically.
No.
Do you know,
No.
is there nothing left, are there no more universal constants to be discovered in physics?
Gravity, I'd like to see more on that one.
That's right.
Yeah, I think they have a lot more homework to do. I mean, I think the current model, the subatomic model, it definitely works in a pragmatic way, but do they understand it? And have they accounted for all of it? Not yet. They certainly
Dark
haven't.
energy and dark matter. good
Yeah,
grief.
the whole of dark matter. I mean, dark matter is 6 times as common.
No, there's lots of things they can't explain.
Yes.
But his point was, we don't need to know any more about the universal constants of physics in order to explain it. It's just that we can't put it all together to explain it.
Yeah, I think they do, and a good lesson on that is, for example, is dark energy. because for a long time that was, I mean, that's a theoretical construct itself. But at least it accounted for the expansion, the continued expansion of the universe, which was thought for a long time to be constant. The problem is that now with more telescopes looking further back in time, well, it's not so constant. And so I mean, that's one of the reasons for the Rubin telescope, because the idea is that it looks at the southern hemisphere, almost all of it, scans it all, 3 times a week for 10 years, and at very high resolution. And what's the reason for that? Because then they have a map of the trajectories of the evolution of galaxies and stars, and what their fate has been or might be. And because the problem with dark matter is that yes, it's a very useful thing to add to equations to kind of explain the trajectories of stars in galaxies like our own, in the Milky Way. Because clearly there isn't enough visible matter to provide enough gravitational force to account for those trajectories that we see. That's the problem. And so there's missing matter. Some of the pictures that have come back suggest that there might be a reticular network in space, but we don't know whether that's dark matter or not. But you know, the problem is we're looking at stuff that's many light years away, and yes, the resolution is pretty amazing, but it's still pretty crude. And so when you say there's missing matter, what does that mean? You didn't see it, or it's actually missing? And yet that was brought into cosmology, into Peebles and Company in the 1980s. It's one of the reasons you got a Nobel Prize. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is provisional, but I would agree with you at a working level, making most of the stuff that we use and all the time. We don't need to know that stuff, but we do. Because clearly transistors have reached a quantum limit. You can only pack so much into a small space before you get into tunneling, and which we talked about last week.
But this is explaining known physics.
Yes, known physics, but there's more to it than that. And there's, I would say another thing. The one thing I would question in something like that, who is it that's asking the question? Yes, they may be a physicist, but are they actively involved in some research program? Well, what do they actually know? Was this an undergraduate degree?
No, this was
a postdoc degree. It makes a big difference, I think.
This was a theoretical physicist from
Well,
from Princeton who's speaking to his colleagues at
good
Waterloo.
place.
So he was a very prominent
Yeah,
theoretical physicist.
yeah.
Trying to work on what I was working on, I don't know, but he was explaining his field
Yeah.
and
Well,
what it was all about. And it was a pretty amazing for
Yeah.
me to hear that.
If you go on the website here at the library, because I just did it today, I think, or next couple of days, to that little box where I've stuck the papers, there are 3 or 4 papers from Nature that deal exactly with some of the stuff that you're asking.
So what was that little box?
Well,
It's,
I'm not sure what they've labeled it as yet. I think my name's attached to it
Uh-huh.
yet.
Okay.
Provisionally. Initially, they didn't want to do it, but now they're willing to do it, because I wanted to put the Nobel material in there too.
Right.
Because the Nobel material is actually very good. That's been vetted by people around the world. They go to good people before that stuff goes to press.
That question he asked, it was asked many, many years ago.
Yes.
Now, I have a question.
Yeah.
Has CRISPR been used on humans yet?
It has,
It really has?
yeah.
Is how they kill
What did
things.
they fix?
Genes.
We're talking about thalassemia and sickle
And
cell anemia.
sickle cell.
Really?
Yeah. One of the issues is it's kind of a one-shot deal. I mentioned this earlier, or alluded to this earlier, because the CRISPR needs a package to deliver. What's the package? A virus. You hope you choose an inert virus. Well, it's an adenovirus, and it's pretty safe. But the problem is, it's a one-bullet gun, because once you've exposed the immune system, next week's topic, to that adenovirus, it mounts an immune response to that. It has a memory that it encountered that adenovirus before. So you may have got away with it the first time, but you might not get away with it the second time. And the other thing too is there's only so much that you can inject at a time. And if, for example, it's a muscle disease and you have lots of muscles and volume, how do you get enough of this stuff to all of the muscles to do any good? That's the problem with Duchenne dystrophy. We know exactly what to fix. At a molecular level, we understand that. But you can't deliver enough of the stuff to get enough in enough muscles to do any good without resorting to repeated injections, and then you're really into an autoimmune problem.
I thought with CRISPR, it was so tricky that if they made a mistake and just got.
Well, it
someone
was,
next
if
to
you
it-
don't get the 180 gauge street right,
Yeah,
absolutely, and because 180, there might be two versions of that in the same town. Might be a different street, but the number's the same, or one digit out. And initially they, you know, this, they would use maybe 10, 20, maybe 30 at the most bases as a guide, but it turned out that's not enough sometimes. That meaning that particular sequence might be present as part of a larger sequence elsewhere. That's the problem with CRISPR, unintended effects. Yeah, that's the limitation of it. The fix is to make the guide large enough that the chances of it being duplicated somewhere else in the genome is infinitesimally small.
but I heard though that if you cured that disease in that person, all generations next from that person will not have that disease any longer.
The good model is Huntington's disease. That's an autosomal dominant disease. You get that gene, you will get the disease. And the same is true of the autosomal dominant version of Alzheimer's disease. You have the dominant gene, you will get it, almost 100%. And so the argument and I've never understood this about this whole business of Alzheimer's disease, the obvious group to have gone after is go to Colombia, where they have hundreds of thousands of people with autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. And they all get Alzheimer's, clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in their 50s, maybe late 40s, 50s, early 60s at the latest. a perfect one. They are going to get the disease. They have the genetic abnormality. So even if there's a risk of taking one of these mob drugs to clean out beta amyloid and or tau, hopefully tau, and there are toxic effects, well, what's worse? The whole disease hitting you or some lesser version of it? But that would have been, Alzheimer's disease is a really tricky one. It brings up the whole issue of who has the power. Those drugs, I think there are 8 or 9 of those monoclonal antibody drugs now out, and several of them have been approved in the U.S. and a couple of them in Europe and Canada. I think just approved 1 or 2. They're number one, they're expensive. Number 2, they do a really good housekeeping job on beta amyloid. I mean, they do clear the brain of most of the beta amyloid. The whole question, the central question, is does it slow the cognitive decline in a way that you would notice as a family member? Or is that just dependent on some psychological test of questionable value? And then you have the Alzheimer's Disease Association and patients driving them because they know they read this stuff, there's all kinds of material out there. There's a lot of pressure on their docs, particularly son of the porter. Look, my insurance covers it, I want it. And so docs that 2 or 3 years ago wouldn't have done it based on evidence, so-called evidence-based medicine, feel, well, they're swimming upstream, better to cave. And that's what's happening. So it was very embarrassing for the federal FDA. And this antedates Mr. T. It was very embarrassing to, I mean, they had very good scientists looking at this very critically. They turned down at least 3 of those drugs, 1 twice. They failed phase 3 trials, all of them. So you say, okay, what more evidence do you need? And then Biogen, for example, went to them and said, well, we have other evidence. Well, why didn't we hear about that evidence before? And that's another problem because some of the pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not, this is not just about Alzheimer's disease. It's almost the same. Clinical trials are very expensive. They're very complex. They're very hard to do. And most physicians don't have the background to understand how they're done. And they're quite happy if a drug company comes in and says, look, we'll help you out. We'll help you design the study. In fact, we'll even help you do the numbers. And you say, well, that's not quite right. But you can understand the pharmaceutical company's point of view because it costs them maybe $1 billion to do one of these studies, and they have stockholders breathing over their shoulder and putting pressure on them. So you can understand it's a really, the point is, none of those drugs are, if I were on a scale of 5 stars, is a single star in effectiveness. The ideal time to treat somebody with any neurodegenerative disease, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, Pick's disease, you name it, is before any symptoms appear. Any symptoms. Parkinson's disease, another example. I mean, they all are in a kind of a family. And the differences between them are which cells are attacked and what kind of protein is abnormal. Other than that, they belong in a large family. So I thought, when I see people, say, for example, with ALS, by the time, I remember a young man, at a church, Grace Church in Newton, and church I used to go to, there was a family there, he was a Harvard prof, and I was introduced to their eldest son, lovely guy, graduate in engineering from MIT, really bright guy, and I shook his hand. And I looked down and I thought, what the hell's going on there? Because it's atrophy in the hand that didn't match any peripheral nerve distribution to me, and I kind of kept it to myself, except I mentioned it to Ken. Within 6 months, he had a diagnosis of ALS. You have to lose a fair number of cells to get symptoms, probably 50% of them or more. So by the time somebody develops, say, in Parkinson's disease, some kind of tremor, or they're a little slower, or there isn't the same facility with facial expression and that kind of thing. A lot of cells have been lost. You're not going to restore them. There is no rebirth of nerve cells. So any treatment that you have should be designed to protect the survivors. Of the survivors, some of them are already going and teetering, and some are healthier and so on. And there is this remarkable capacity in the nervous system for surviving cells to kind of pick up the slack. It's like running a football team with 7 players on the field and still winning the game, because the 7 really play really well and hard. So getting back to the time of treatment, you know, if you do PET scan studies of people with Alzheimer's disease, 2 to 3 decades before any manifestations, clinical manifestations of the disease, you can see amyloid and some tau, and if you measure the stuff in the spinal fluid, you can find it. So there's a clear, if you say, let's say somebody develops one of these diseases, first manifestation, see the doctor, the diagnosis is made. There's a certain threshold for making a diagnosis, right? That was true of Peter Earle. There was a time when there was enough evidence that it was overwhelmingly concluded this is what he's got. But there's a long prehistory to that. And in that prehistory, and before that prehistory, is the time if you were actually going to do something about it, that's the time to do it. None of the studies so far, well, that's not quite true, but almost all, almost none of them include people in that preclinical phase. Number one, how would you identify them? Number two, are you really going to ask somebody who's asymptomatic to take a drug that might make them sick? Or they might have a little stroke because of it, particularly with these beta amyloid drugs? That's an ethical kind of thing, and it's clearly an awkward decision for anyone, patients, family, and that kind of thing. So it's really very, very complicated. All of these neurodegenerative diseases have a run-up period of at least a decade, 2 or 3 decades. And if you have Huntington's disease, you know it, because it's coming your way. You have that gene, you're going to get it. But you're right about CRISPR. If you fix it, not only will that person not go on to develop Huntington's chorea, but if they're still making children, they won't.
That's right, yeah.
So that's a clear justification. That makes a lot of sense. So, we got off the track here, but in a way, I'm glad we did, because, anything else? No? Okay. So next week, a really well articulated, well, it'll be fairly simple, model of how the immune system works, but it's a good one, good for the people who did it, and important for us.
Isn't that what you had in the paper the other day?
Yeah.
What was that you?
I did, one of the articles in
Yeah.
that thing is on the immune system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that was me working out my understanding
yeah,
from the Nobel stuff and other sources. That was me trying to, I figure you don't really understand something unless you can write about it.
Well, you did a good job on that.
yeah, the T cells regulated.
Oh, thank you, but that was me trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
so, on next week to the immune system.
All right.